Thomas. Okay, so hi, this is Elizabeth Clare Brewington with Brightside Global Trade, and you can reach us at brightsideglobaltrade.org. And today I have Jim Santos, and he's in a couple of my videos this month. We promote books every month, and we review them, and we tell you our favorite ones. And this is one of our authors for this month, and he's launching his book, and it's about expats. And having lived abroad myself and worked abroad with several advertising agencies, I am delighted to introduce you to Jim Santos. So Jim, I know you were showing us the book. Show it to us again and tell us all about this wonderful book that you're releasing.
I'll give you the cover here. And by the way, hello, Elizabeth, and thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, as you see, the title is Living Abroad, Challenging the Myths of Expat Life. And the reason I wanted to write this is I've been a published writer for the travel and international retirement community for several years now. I got over 200 articles published in Wall Street Journal, International Living, Huffington Post. And I've also given talks at conferences for people who are considering the expat life. I've given, I think, about a dozen talks in Ecuador and in different parts of the US to several hundred people at a time about Ecuador in general, but also about the expat life. And through that, I've met so many people who have this idea of what expat life is like or what they hope it will be. And I noticed that even within the industry, they tend to push kind of not exactly a rose-colored view of it, but they stress the positive and rarely bring up some of the more challenging aspects. So what I wanted to do with this book is take some of the more popular myths that I've heard and the questions that have come up from people, and then kind of shine the light of truth on them and experience, let you know what it has been like for me actually living in another country for 6 years, and some of our travels to other countries. So I was going for something that would be entertaining and informative because it has so much personal experience in it. It's kind of a very fun read. And whether you live abroad now or are thinking about it or are just curious about it, I think there's a lot of good information in there for people.
Wow, that's terrific. I love the cover, and I guess that's Ecuador. Yeah. So yeah. That's amazing. Okay. So let's go back to the whole expat experience, and this is interesting about seniors, because we've been hearing a lot about what kind of jobs could a senior person do. But yes, you could be a CEO of an international company, and you could be a representative and teach English or whatever it is that you want to do, or work for a corporation. So tell us about, how would you define an expat?
Well, an expat is just someone who has chosen to live in a country other than the one they were born in. Sometimes there's this feeling that you go and you never come back. And that's really not the case for most people. Most people tend to live in another country for a few years and then go on to another country or go back to their homeland. It's not unusual or completely unheard of for someone to just stay in that country. But I think for most of us, the idea is to just get a taste of life, living in another culture and trying to adapt where they might even not even speak your language. So it can be a very interesting and a very challenging thing. And it's definitely not for everybody. In fact, the very first question that I look at is this myth that anybody can do it. I ran into the same thing preparing for the Inca Trail. My wife and I hiked the Inca Trail a few years ago. And by the way, I have another book about that if you're interested. But you hear all the time when you're trying to set up the tours, if you're in reasonable physical shape, anybody can walk the Inca Trail. And that's not exactly true. I mean, you have to hit 14,000 feet twice. You have to be able to work where there's very little oxygen in the air. And it's the same thing with expat life. You really have to have a very open mind. You have to be willing to roll with the changes. And you have to be looking for a new experience. So it's not. Sometimes people think that they're going to run away from their current lives and run away and live somewhere that's cheaper and where they can just live a different lifestyle. I found that the successful expats are the ones who are running to something and not away from something. So if you're not moving because you want to experience that new lifestyle, if you're running away from something, it's not going to work for you.
That's right. So what were the best expat experiences you had? And then we'll do with some challenging ones, and then we'll talk a little bit about the book. So if you can draw something from the book of any particular chapter or anything that was most rewarding about expat living for you.
I'd have to say it's the people that you meet. Not necessarily the other expats, but the people living in other countries that you meet, and getting an idea of what their lives are like and what's important to them and the differences. One of the things I do mention in one of the chapters is that the sense of time in South America is completely different from in North America. And you've probably run into this also. And in North America, you have schedules and you show up for appointments. Your Zoom meeting is scheduled for a certain time and you got to be there right then. And it's just not like that in a lot of South American countries. The quality of time you spend with people is more important than the calendar or the clock. If an Ecuadorian tells you they'll see you mañana, they don't necessarily mean tomorrow. We'll get to this mañana. They don't necessarily mean tomorrow. They mean we'll get to it, but not today, right?
Jeff, how you doing, Jeff?
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, we're in the middle of an interview. So Elton just joined us.
Okay.
So we were just talking, Elton, about the rewarding experiences of expat living. And that is so true. Meeting people, even meeting Americans overseas, and meeting the locals. It's nothing like connecting with people around the world, and it's truly fascinating. Also, I found, and what were some of the challenges that you found as an expat?
Well, of course, the biggest challenge that most expats feel if they're not already bilingual is learning a language. If you move to a country that speaks a different language, that can really be a challenge because it affects everything. If you're on vacation, you're there and people are taking care of things for you and everything's handled. But when you're living there, you have to set up your electricity and your water, and you have to navigate the grocery stores and the bus systems. So you really need to learn some of the language. And, for those of us who grew up in the 70s with lots of chemical amusement aids, sometimes learning a new language is not the easiest thing that you can do. So it's definitely a challenge. But if you attempt it, it's also extremely rewarding. Even if you mangle the language, it really helps you see things from a different viewpoint, and it also really helps in connecting with the locals. And you've really got to do that if you're living in another country.
So show us the book again, and I'll tell people that it's available. It's available everywhere. Or are you launching this week?
It's available right now through Amazon, both as an ebook and as paperback.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
So the book is available everywhere. It's called Living Abroad, Challenging the Myths of Expat Life with Jim Santos. And I would highly recommend the book. We'll also be reviewing the book as well. So watch for our reviews, and we'll be talking to Jim a lot. So this is an amazing book for those of you who've traveled, lived abroad, those who are thinking about going abroad. And yes, I know we're all scared of the pandemic, but at the same time, it'll be over soon and we'll be traveling soon. So thank you for this interview. And would you like to ask a question before we close?
Your insightfulness and hopefully the encouragement to people who read it will inspire them to consider the different models of living a life abroad. And as you mentioned in your previous discussion that, the consideration has a novel approach. I mean, the model, whether you live there, because it is a challenge to live in a country for just 2 weeks to find out what it's really, really like, and perhaps it's a retirement consideration. You know, do I want to retire in the culture? And how easy the language it is to discover and understand. And okay, so you've also got the issues of food, medical supply and service, as well as dental and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And you know, but at the end of the day, it is exciting. It is exciting to consider living in another culture and
Yeah.
think of how richly blessed we will be to be able to add that component to the value of our lives.
Mhm.
You know, and
Yeah. I do talk about
I-
healthcare in the book as well. My wife and I
Well,
actually
tell us
both had-
about that. Yeah, tell us about the healthcare that you talk about in the book.
well, my wife and I both had surgery while we were in Ecuador. I
Okay.
had arthroscopic surgery on my shoulder,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
it was a very pleasant experience. I mean, just in general, doctors in Ecuador and in a lot of foreign countries don't treat the symptoms. When you go to
Okay.
see your doctor in Ecuador, you spend the first half hour, 45 minutes talking about how are you sleeping, what are you eating, have you been
Oh,
getting
cool.
out and exercising and walking, and then there's an exam, and they usually don't prescribe any medication. They'll tell you, you know, I want you eating this food instead of that food, and I want you to get out and walk at least twice a day. You know, it's more of an overall health thing, and you have a relationship with the doctor rather than just a
Right,
patient in a file. And that was a very interesting thing to see.
I
I
bet.
wanted to touch on something Elizabeth brought up briefly there, was talking about COVID and people starting to travel again.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Another reason the timing is very good for this particular book is because kind of a side benefit of COVID, the silver lining in the cloud, is that for a lot of people, their employers have discovered that they don't need to be in the office, that they
Right.
can operate
Sure.
remotely through Zoom. And with the internet now, there's really no difference in working from just down the street or working from the other side of the world, except maybe the time difference. So it's a great opportunity now for people to take what they have learned during the shutdown. And even if you just decide, I'm going to live in Portugal for 6 months, and I'll just work from there while I'm there. It can just be a great experience in a way of, can actually, it's hard to imagine, but you can actually save money by moving to another country for a few months.
Sure.
Moving to Ecuador, saving money was not our goal, but I was still working remotely as a network technician. After a year and a half, I realized, why am I still working? We have all the money we need in retirement right now. So I was able to retire early and then really begin taking up writing as kind of a second career.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's really awesome.
So there's one question I do have to ask, is that being an expat is a lot of fun, and but when you come back to the United States or to your home country, you've not kind of changed, but things change around you. Now, some of us are lucky we came back with money, but sometimes you could lose a job overseas and you can come back in really harsh circumstances.
Right.
How does the expat adjust when they come back home?
Yeah.
Is there anything in your book or
As a matter of
personal
fact,
advice?
Yes. Yes, because there's also people who try out the expat life and find out that it's not for them, and they come back. Or also people like my wife and I who decided that rather than live in one country, we want to do roving retirement and live in a few different countries over the course of the year. In the book, I do talk about culture shock when you first go to a new country, but there's also then even a bigger culture shock when you come back to the US.
Yep, that's a big shock.
Suddenly everybody is moving so fast and everything is so rushed. You become hyper aware of the amount of waste. When you go to the store and everything is packaged in plastic in a box and then something else too. There's just, it really does give you a completely new perspective on life and also appreciation for many of the things that we have in the US that people take for granted, like just having potable water. There are a lot of places in the world right now where that is not a given. You're getting water in bottles, you're getting it delivered to you or something like that. So that culture shock really works both ways. And to me, that's part of that's part of what makes an expat lifestyle such an interesting choice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you think about the reasons why you choose a particular destination, whether it's the people that are just richly, generous and they're loving and supportive, or it's the scenery in a particular destination that's just remarkable, and you find yourself just inspired and in a state of peace. And so, and everybody has a different experience level. And then when it comes to money, the value that people place on money and how you fit into that. There are a lot of elements. I'm sure you've discovered those. And is there one that stands out in your mind that the reason that people pick a particular destination?
Well, there's two parts to that, because they tend to move over abroad for a wide variety of reasons also. Sometimes it is because they can't afford to live in the US or feel they can't afford to live in the US. Sometimes it's that they have met someone in the US who was from another country, and they decide they're going to take turns living in those countries. Sometimes they are actually running from something in the US. At the time of our move, when we moved there 2013, 2014, we did meet expats who left the country because they did not like the idea of a Black man in the White House, which was kind of a surprise to us. We thought that if you moved overseas and met other expats, they're going to be the most free-thinking, liberal-minded people in the world, and it turns out not to be the case.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the things that I discovered, because my first job in India sent me to London to work for Glaxo, the headquarters, and I was with everybody, the scientists and everything, and living the high life. And then when I came back, people looked at me strange and funny, like I had this privilege that I was sent, and the adjustment was so big. But I was so young at the time that it just hurt me a lot psychologically. But I feel like your book is valuable because when we were just thrown into the job, there was no choice of why we were there. We went to work, and so having a book like yours, I think, is a big asset, because it kind of gives you a narrative that can help you, either if you're considering it or if you've been there. So I'm looking forward to reading the book and reviewing it. But thank you for this interview.
One second. There's one element that I just want to make a contrast to, because we also left 2013 and we spent a year abroad to 2014, and we left seeking better opportunities because we had the opportunity and we should do so. And so at the end of the day, it didn't pan out, but it did. And so we moved around a lot, and we had family all over. And it was a very interesting experience from the standpoint of looking at, but I have to think that for our standpoint, we won because we found solutions at every turn that we left. We found a way to look at things from a different point of view, and a way to solve problems that we might not have been able to incorporate had we stayed. So, and then when we came back, it was time to come back. But it's been an interesting adjustment in the lieu of. But I mean, and who knows what will happen? Things could pan out that we are in another place again. But I have to say that we're stronger and more perceptionally capable in lieu of.
I always say this. I feel really sorry for people who only want to cut grass and look at their yard, and they haven't seen the world. And so I hope your book will encourage people to do that. So thank you for watching. All this information will be available at brightsideglobaltrade.org. If you want to show us your book again, and the book is available everywhere. You can buy it at Amazon. And we are talking to the author, Jim Santos, Living Abroad, Challenging the Myths of Expat Life. I think this book is fabulous, and it's the right time to have a book like this, because when the pandemic is kind of, I wouldn't say over, because it may never be over, but when it's a little bit in control and you can travel again, you might want to think about going to Ecuador and all the places that Jim has been to.
One last question. Is there a destination for you that's just outstanding and you recommend that people go to hands down?
Gosh, there's so many. Was it St. Augustine who said that the world is a book, and people who don't travel only read one page. You know, every place that we've been, and that's really the reason that we decided to sell our condo in Ecuador and move, set up to do a roving retirement lifestyle. We traveled all over Ecuador, part of that in preparation for the Inca Trail hike. And then when we did the Inca Trail, we were in places in Peru. We went to Uruguay for a few weeks, visited Montevideo, and Buenos Aires is just across the river. So of course we had to go to Buenos Aires too. And you see all these wonderful things, and you wonder, gosh, what else am I missing? I haven't seen so many other places now. So it's really tough to just settle on what is, a standout place. I think the secret is, especially if you're in a relationship, if you're happy with yourself and with your relationship, then you're going to be happy wherever you go, and you're going to find positive things wherever you go. If you're a negative person, you're going to see all the bad stuff, no matter where you go. I knew people who told me that Lima, for instance, Lima in Peru, they went there on a cruise, and all they really saw was the harbor area and the industrial area and all the shipping and stuff. And they did a quick bus trip here and there, but their overall impression was, oh, it's a big, dirty city. It's a horrible place. And, we went there and we walked around the historical district and walked around all the different little neighborhoods. And we came back saying, boy, Lima is a wonderful place. It's really beautiful. We'd love to go back there and stay a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
Well, perhaps you carried the wonder of the place with you. So wherever you would be, it would be wonderful. That's an interesting perspective.
I have a lovely story about the same thing. Elton's bucket list is to go to Cuba, and I was sitting in an area, was waiting for something in a waiting room, and there was this old man, and he was sitting next to me, and Elton was like, what are you talking to this guy about? He was fascinating. He was a guy from Cuba, and he had lived in the United States for 35 years. He had this whole story about Cuba cuisine and Cuba cars. And if you saw him sitting down, he looked like, nobody. But when I started chatting with him, he turned out to be this amazing person with so many stories to tell. So, yes, so don't judge the cover by the book. Travel is always strange. You meet people that don't look like you. There's foods that you've never eaten before. There's so many things to explore. But that's what life is all about. And thank you for this book, and thank you for this interview.
You're
watching.
So much,
thank you, everyone.
Best to you and your wife, your travels, and may you be inspired to continue that.
And if you're watching this video on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Twitter, snap a photo of your travels and put it in the comments, because we'd love to hear that you watched this video, and tell us about your expat life if you are an expat or were an expat. We'd love to hear from you, and we hope you enjoy streaming with us. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Jim. Have a real wonderful day.